All right, good afternoon and welcome Barriers and Underserved Populations Subcommittee members and members of the public to this January 24th, 2024 Governor's Workforce Development Board Barriers and Underserved Populations meeting. For the record, my name is Ken Evans, Chair of the Barriers and Underserved Populations Subcommittee, and I'll just quickly mention my Vice Chair is on the call as well, Dr. Tiffany Tyler Garner. Katie, if you will you please take roll call, confirm a quorum, and verify posting?
Sure thing. Thank you, Vice Chair Evans. Okay, so we have Subcommittee Chair Evans.
It's all good. I'm here.
Okay, thank you. Vice Chair Tyler Garner.
Present.
Thank you. David Drybelvis.
I'm here.
Thank you. Jerry Merritt.
Present.
Thank you. We have Kevin Landry.
Here.
Thank you. Derek Jimphy.
Present.
Thank you. Evelyn Thompson Hilbert.
Present.
Thank you. Michael Yoder. Okay, and then we had Mr. Chair, we had two pre-notified absences for George Galt and Crystal Slaughter.
Yep.
And then for our non-voting member roll call, we have Lori Caldron.
Okay, very good.
And then so with that, Mr. Chair, Katie Gilbertson, Governor's Office Workforce Innovation for the record, I hereby affirm that this January 24th, 2024 Governor's Workforce Development Board Barriers and Underserved Populations Subcommittee meeting has reached a quorum, and I further affirm that the agenda and notice for this meeting were properly posted to pursuant to Nevada's open meeting law, NRS 241020.
Thank
I
you very
see, sorry, excuse me, I see Mr. Yoder just joined the call.
Okay, very good.
Hello.
Okay,
Thank
thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gilbertson. Okay, before we proceed, I kindly request that anyone who speaks today to identify themselves for the record. Additionally, if you're not a member of the subcommittee, please wait to be called upon by myself or give feedback during public comment. The one thing that I'll mention there is that we may have non-voting members of the subcommittee. You are still considered to be part of the subcommittee and able to make comments freely throughout the course of the agenda today. With that, we'll continue on to agenda item number 4, public comments. Members of the public on remote technology are invited to provide comments at this time. No action may be taken on any matters during public comments until the matter itself has been included on an agenda as an item for possible action. Any public comments on the telephone? Any public comments on Zoom? Okay, we'll close out this agenda item then. Moving on to agenda item number 5 for possible action. Is there any discussion before I call for a motion to approve the October 25th, 2023 Barriers and Underserved Populations Subcommittee meeting minutes? Okay, hearing no further discussion, I call for a motion to approve the October 25th, 2023 Barriers and Underserved Populations Subcommittee meeting minutes. Do I have a motion?
Motion
Jerry Merritt for the record. I motion to approve.
And then a second?
Kevin
second,
Landry.
Evelyn Thompson Hilbert.
Hey, all good. Great participation. Appreciate it. Okay, moved by board committee subcommittee member Merritt, second by subcommittee member Thompson Hilbert. Any further discussion? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, motion carries, minutes are approved. Moving on to agenda item number 6 for discussion information only, I would like to recognize Vice Chair Tyler Gardner and myself to share the subcommittee goals for 2024. And I'll go ahead and preface it before I turn it over to the Vice Chair to help lead the quick comments. What we've determined is that we were partially successful as a subcommittee in 2023. And what I mean by that is we were able to identify resource speakers and groups throughout the South, the North, and the rural regions to come in and give us some information about what was going on. In addition to that, on a regular basis, we received data information about underserved populations or segments of the populations that are facing barriers either in accessing our workforce development system or successfully getting through it and maintaining employment. So we received the data, we had some good speakers, but I think one of the things we identified is that when we get to the end of 2024, we want to be able to say that through the work of this subcommittee and in turn the resource partners and the system partners, as well as any nonprofit or other community-based organizations, we've actually identified some of the targeted subgroups and had an impact. So to that end, to help us focus, what we plan to do is have one population across the three regions at one time. And what we've determined is that we'd like to start with underserved and underrepresented males in the southern, the northern, and the rural Nevada with the highest unemployment rates. And then in turn produce an actionable deliverable after reviewing each population. And again, this is data driven because when we did the data analysis, again, real quickly for the record, there were three population subgroups that were focused on. Young males between the ages of 16 to 24, primarily African American in the southern region, and then primarily Latinx males in the northern region. The second subgroup was single parent households, primarily led by women with school-age children. And then the final subgroup was individuals with varying abilities. So having said that, the statistics suggested that by far the population with the highest unemployment rates, if not in some case disproportionately higher unemployment rates, were African American males in the South, Latinx males in the North. So our intent will be to focus on that targeted population, come up with some actions that can be taken, again, working with system-wide partners. And when it's all said and done, be in a position to say, here's what we discussed, here's some of the recommendations that were jointly arrived at. And then a year from now, hopefully there'll be some actual things that happen and those rates will have improved. And then we're in a position to move on to another subgroup. So that's the overarching framing that I wanted to provide. And with that, Vice Chair Tyler Garner, do you have anything else that you'd like to share at this point?
No, I think you've done an exceptional job sharing with the committee the direction. Just would encourage everyone to consider what are the opportunities, particularly as we look at the needs of the populations that we're prioritizing. There are a number of angles or vantage points or resources that we could leverage to move the needle. Know that this laser-like focus is with an intention toward impact. And so as you think about the barriers or reasons why the population may not be represented in the workforce at the levels that we want, we also encourage you to provide feedback, guidance, or recommendations around different strategies that will help move the needle, whether that's looking at communications, where the resources are located, or personal barriers. We want to make sure that there's impact at the end of the year and at the end of this process. And so thank you, Chair Evans and others.
All right. And before we move on, what I'd like to find out is any questions from our subcommittee members, both voting and non-voting, on the planned course of action, comments, concerns, or questions at this time? Okay, seeing none, we'll close it out for now. One of the things I want to remind the subcommittee members is that one of the things we want to do to keep things moving is, if you have ideas, comments, concerns, or if you have community-based groups or agencies that are working on this particular initiative already, please forward that information to Ms. Gilbertson or Vice Chair Tyler Garner, because between the two of them, they'll help set up the agenda and the course of action as we move forward. Yes, Committee Member Thompson Hilbert. Go ahead.
Hi, Evelyn. You just said my name, Evelyn Thompson Hilbert, for the record. My question really quickly, do you want to know of models out of state as well? And this is to
Ken
the
Evans.
committee.
Yes, Ken Evans for the record. Yes, we are open to ideas both in state and out of state. When it's all said and done, we want best practices, and we want to be in a position to do two things: identify and present the best practices, if not come up with a demo project, for lack of a better word. But then beyond that, we want the idea hopefully to be scalable and something we can do statewide, even if we still have to make some regional adjustments in order to appropriately implement. So bottom line, yes, we're open to both in-state and out-of-state best practices.
Thank you. And then we submit that as you spoke, because I have a group in Ohio that are working with this exact demographic. They are funded by Easter Seals, and they have data that we could capture. So I will get that information together and get it to you guys. Evelyn Thompson Hilbert for the record.
Thank you very much. Yes, as I mentioned, forward that information in concert with both Vice Chair Tyler Garner as well as Ms. Gilbertson, and then we'll be in a position to have it presented at the next meeting. In addition to that, what I'll also share with the group is there may also be cases where we take it to the full board committee as well, but ideally we want to try to bring it here, come up with recommendations, demonstration projects, etc., and then go from there. But we don't want to lose time. That's the reason why I'm saying if we need to, we'll figure out ways to move faster. Any other ideas, comments, questions, suggestions from other subcommittee members? And we're open. I want to be clear about that. We're open. For example, one of the things, Ms. Gilbertson, King of Jewels, I know has been doing some things, and I've talked about them from time to time, but I think they're in a position to provide some type of update about what they've been doing between now and the last time they presented.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. Mr. Sean Torrey, Vice President.
Wait.
Oh, my bad. I didn't know you were calling me. Sorry.
Yeah, we have to have you agendized, so
Not a problem.
yeah, but yeah, I don't want to get in trouble from a public meeting standpoint. So I think you have to be agendized, but here's what I'm going to ask you to do. We will have a public comment section at the end of the meeting. That'll be a good time for you to share 3 minutes or less of comments.
Not a problem. My apologies again for the record.
No problem. No problem. Happy you're here. Okay, with that, we'll close agenda item number 6 and move on to agenda item number 7 for discussion, information only. I would like to recognize Department of Employment, Training, and Rehabilitation, or DETR Chief Economist David Smith, to present a data update on underserved populations. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of the subcommittee, and thank you for the opportunity to present today. As you mentioned, my name is David Schmidt. I'm the Chief Economist for the Research and Analysis Bureau in the Nevada Department of Employment, Training, and Rehabilitation. And I'm here to expand on what the chair was speaking about earlier, specifically looking at more information about male unemployment across the state. And I want to give you a little bit of context about where this data is coming from. In a moment here, I'll share my screen. And so I'll talk about where the data comes from and run through at a pretty high level some of the data that's available. so that you can consider that. When trying to look at individuals who are unemployed and their demographics, there's a few different sources that we can use. One is the Current Population Survey. This is a survey that drives our monthly employment and unemployment data. So when we say that the state unemployment rate is 5.4%, this is the primary source for that data. This does have a very small sample size, though. Approximately 800 households across the state are included in the survey every month, with the response rate of about 2/3. That means we only have about 600 households that drive the total data. And when you think of unemployment being 5% of roughly 65% of the total population of the state, those numbers get very small very fast. If you're talking about unemployment, you might be talking about 10 or fewer households that are capturing that data. And so it's really not sufficient to do much drilling down with this data. Another source that we have is the American Community Survey. This is also run by the Census Bureau. It is an annual survey, so it's a little less timely. But instead of 800 households, it has about 26 or 27,000 individual sample units in it. So it's a much more detailed survey. It has more information about individuals beyond just their employment and unemployment statistics, including things like access to income, access to healthcare, housing costs, presence of internet in the household, computer in the household, means of commuting, industry, occupation information. It's a much larger survey, but it is old. The most recent data that we have is the 1-year survey for 2022. They should also have the 5-year data through 2022, but it hasn't been published on the website in a microdata format yet. But the newest data is always more than a year old. And so that is the downside to this. It's not the most timely data. And so especially as the subcommittee is trying to consider how can we measure the current impact on things, everything will be happening with a pretty significant lag here just because of the nature of this data. The other potential source of data is using administrative data. This is information like unemployment insurance claims or even public assistance information if that were included in a system like InPower. This would be looking at people who are participating in programs and in some way merging those records together to try to report on it. That can be more timely, but it's not population-wide. And so if you have people that aren't participating in a program or aren't participating in a linked program, they would be missing from the sample. And so everything kind of has its pros and cons, but I wanted to give you at least a brief overview of what some of the opportunities are to try to measure and capture the data that you're looking for. What I'm presenting today comes from the American Community Survey. This does strike a pretty good balance between the size of the information that's available, as well as the details that we can get to. One of the big caveats with 1-year data is that it's only available for large enough geographic areas, specifically areas with a population of 65,000 or more. And so if you looked at counties in Nevada, you would get Washoe County and Clark County. No other county would be large enough to qualify. The 5-year estimates can get very detailed. They can get down to a census tract or a census block in some cases level, which is a few neighborhood blocks. Very, very detailed, but it's a 5-year period. And so the trade-off of trying to get too narrow geographically is that you have to rely on that 5-year data. And currently, if you're looking at 2017 to 2021, that includes 3 years before the pandemic, 2020 in the middle of the pandemic, and 2021 just as we're starting to come out of it. And so that's not where we are today. That is data that's a couple of years old. I see Dr. Tyler Garner has her hand up.
Just a question about sampling. Do you feel we have data sufficient to also understand the employment picture in our rurals? So we have data on males in the north and the south, those other counties. So you feel like the sampling will allow for us to evaluate or examine what areas of the community may need to be prioritized there?
David Schmidt again for the record, and you lead into the rest of my presentation very well with that question, so thank you. What I'm going to do today is actually touch on looking at the male population and employment, unemployment rate, participation rate. From both the 1-year and 5-year data periods, I've tried to take the areas that I can get And I'll show you a map that kind of lays out where they are so you have a sense of what it looks like. And then also I just essentially did a raw analysis of high-level unemployment rate, labor force participation for some different breakouts below for the male population to show what is and isn't available within these different measures. Excuse me. So I also want to say that the ACS data has a lot of pre-populated information from the Census Bureau, which is nice because in part it's also publicly available. This is all information that anyone could have access to look at themselves or to try to verify what we're looking at here. I see Ms. Thompson-Hilbert has a question.
Yeah, this may not be directly for you, David, so I'm not sure, but I'm going to ask because it's data. You guys don't capture like any of the disconnected youth, so it's strictly unemployment data or any employment, part-time employment or employment. Oh, I forgot the name of the group. J for Jobs for Nevada Graduates, right? They have a program where they may be in workforce development programs for employment. So I guess what I'm asking is, how deep does the employment data go that you can capture? And I apologize if it's not the appropriate question.
No, certainly, I'm happy to do my best to try to answer it. David Schmidt again for the record. So, like on the topic of disconnected youth, this is the same data source that I would use to look at that, because you are able to combine information about is someone working or not, is someone looking for work or not, are they currently in school or not? And so, if you're looking at the disconnected youth, you're looking at not in school and not working. Or maybe not in school and not even looking for work, depending on how you want to. What nuance you want to include there. And so it should capture that to some extent. It is survey related data. And one of the caveats with surveys is you will see weird stuff. If you look at individual survey responses over time, you might have someone in month 1 is unemployed, in month 2 is out of the labor force, which says not even looking for work at all. Month 3 is unemployed again. And so were they out of the labor force? Were they in the labor force? The data can be a bit messy and noisy at the finest detail, but I think you can dive in to some extent. If you want to get beyond a couple of factors like male and unemployed and moved houses in the last year, that's probably about as fine as you can go. And even then it's going to be spotty data at the 1-year level. If you're looking at the 5-year data, you can get pretty detailed, but it's more of a, here's the background against which we're operating as opposed to evaluating the performance of a program in a narrow window. If you're really doing program evaluation, the best thing you can do is have follow-ups with the involved individuals or track them through, like, did they show up in a wage file down the road, or did they show up enrolled in a school somewhere, or merging that data in through something like InPower to link data, administrative data, because you have the individual, so you don't have that missing, we don't know where they are piece of information. And so you're better able to evaluate what their actual outcomes might be.
Thank you.
So the data that I'm using from the American Community Survey is what's called public use microdata. There's a lot of custom things that the census will do, including things like congressional districts, state legislative districts, school districts, which might for other audiences be helpful in trying to tell a story of what's happening around the country. What I'm using are what's called public use microdata areas, which don't exactly correspond to counties or cities or the things that we tend to think about, but the big benefit is that these are constructed nationally. And so it's across the US if you wanted to do that level of comparison. But they also always have a population of about 100,000, which means that we can get that 1-year data for them, even though for rural Nevada, you'll see in the blue area of this map here, that public use microdata area spans most of the state. The Pumas that we have in Nevada, there's a few in Washoe County. One includes Sparks and most of northern Washoe County. One is sort of south and west Reno. One is sort of the urban core of Reno. One is Carson City up through Dayton, Silver Springs, Yerington, Douglas County, covering a couple of counties there. Then you have one for almost all of rural Nevada. You have 4 that kind of surround Las Vegas within Clark County, but each of which are coming in. Like the one in the north dives down into North Las Vegas. The ones on the east and south come into Boulder City and Henderson. The one on the west dives down pretty close into central Las Vegas. And so none of them are completely urban or completely rural if you're looking at the outlying ones, but they all contain elements of both. And so what I did for the analysis here today is the 3 that touch Reno. The one on the west, the one in the center, and the one in the north, I combined into what I called the northern urban area, clearly going up past Pyramid Lake into northern Washoe County. Also includes some rural information. It's not perfect, but it's more Reno than if I included everything else. The area that includes Carson City, as well as most of rural Nevada, is what I call rural Nevada. Even though Carson City isn't necessarily incredibly rural, it felt like that was a more natural link because I'm trying to get as many observations into the data as possible to expand what we can show. And then everything in Clark County, I called South Urban, though clearly something like Mesquite or Laughlin are more rural than urban, but that's the way the data is broken out. And so when I'm presenting the rest of the data to you, that's kind of what's included where. It's not a perfectly fine line, but I think it helps to make some differences between it. And so to look at male unemployment, I divided up those PUMAs into 3 different areas. It's only the male population, so that includes outside the labor force, inside the labor force. That was all in the initial cut. I limited the age here to 20 to 64, mostly because I wanted to be able to make some distinguishing observations when it comes to education. And so especially if you're looking for people with a high school education or less, I wanted to not be including people who couldn't necessarily be expected to have completed that education yet. And so I cut it off at 20. Different analysis could use different ages. Typically 16 plus is what's included in our normal unemployment rate. But because we're going into combinations of education and demographics, I thought this was a reasonable break to make. I also filtered out any data where the standard error was most of the observation. And so if I say there's 500 people unemployed, but the standard error is 400, I'm really saying the number is somewhere between 100 and 900. And it could be a little or it could be a lot. And so I was trying to narrow down the data to something that had a bit more quality to it. It's not perfectly fine. It is a little bit arbitrary, but I just wanted to be transparent about what's in the data. And in the 1-year data, you're going to see some of the limitations that we have here. So at a high level, 1-year 2022 data for males in the 3 areas, you can see the unemployment rates here. In all of the charts that you will see, the unemployment rate is on the horizontal axis. And so the further to the right dot is, the higher the unemployment rate is. The vertical axis is the labor force participation rate, which says how much of the population is either working or looking for work. And so this is sort of a measure of engagement. If it's lower, that could be someone who's retired or outside the labor force because they don't have to be, or it could be someone who's very discouraged and isn't even bothering to look for work. And so this doesn't go into cause so much, but it does give you a sense of how engaged are people and how successful are they at finding work when they are looking. And so the 2 numbers that I would focus on in the tables that you will see are in the rightmost columns. I apologize that everything is going to be pretty abbreviated because this was a crank through as much data as I could to try to present it to you. LFPR, that's that labor force participation rate. UR is the unemployment rate. And those are the 2 numbers I'll be mostly looking at. Each group will be broken out in its own row. So you can see the North Urban number, the Reno area. You can see the total labor force, the number of people who are employed, number of people who are unemployed, and then those 2 measures, and you continue that down as you go. So if we look at...
Pardon me, Ken Evans for the record. If you go back to that last chart, I won't hold you too long on it. So from a summary standpoint or a high-level standpoint, take South Urban, we're looking at about 30,000 that are unemployed. And then there's an unemployment rate of about 5%, which I'm almost sure is higher than the norm regionally and nationally, if memory serves me correctly. Is that a good summary? I guess the other connection I would make too is getting back to the question about the disconnected youth. I would assume that some of them may be a subset of the 30,000, or there may or may not be some overlap.
David Schmidt again for the record, and yes, the disconnected youth who are males would be a subset of this. It would be a pretty small subset. As far as the unemployment rate, at this level, since we're looking at the male population 20 to 64, this is pretty close to the numbers you would see if we were looking at the state unemployment rate through a different measure. I wouldn't compare them directly because they are measured with some slightly different definitions. But for example, in December, the state's unemployment rate was estimated at 5.4%. If we were looking at raw survey data, the average over the last 12 months was about 5%. So this would be pretty much on par for the state as a whole. Where you'll see the bigger differences is as we dive into adding additional demographic factors on top of that. And that makes sense because the male population is half of the overall population. At the male-female level, there aren't very big differences by itself. It's more in the sub-breakouts beneath that.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
Not certainly. Dr. Tyler Garner.
Thank you, Dr. Tyler Garner, for the record. Just a quick clarifying question. So if I'm evaluating this accurately, the male unemployment rate generally is consistent with the state unemployment rate. So you don't see disparity there. In some instances, may be lower.
David Schmidt again for the record, that's correct. If you're looking just at sex, because it is such a large population, the difference between men and women is not very large. If we wanted to dive into that, or like participation between men and women, I don't have those charts for you here today, but just because it's such a large group, there tend to be pretty small variations there. With things like labor force participation, I do know, according to our latest data, compared to other states, the participation rate for men is pretty close to the national median in Nevada. It is down from where we were a couple of decades ago. Prior to the Great Recession, we had a much higher participation rate for men, in part because of the construction industry and the source of jobs and high-paying jobs that you could get there. But following the Great Recession, that rate dropped, but has largely stabilized at about the level we're at now. In the pandemic, we were hit harder, but we have been recovering to close to what the national level of people engaging with the workforce is. And for men, that rate is about 90% overall. If you're looking at women in Nevada, the rate is a lot flatter over time, but in Nevada, we do tend to have a lower participation rate than the national average, about 5 to 10 percentage points. Also, nationally speaking, women participate in the labor force at a lesser rate. It's about 75% as opposed to 90%. And we are a bit below the national average in terms of that. And so while they haven't experienced the same drop that we had prior to the Great Recession, they also haven't been increasing. They're at about the same level that they've been toward the high end of Nevada's trends, but still below the national average in terms of the overall rate of participation in the workforce, if that makes sense. And this is a whole other tangent that I don't want to spend too much time on, because I know the chair would like to keep the meeting moving along, and I will talk for hours about this if you give me the chance. Okay, and I guess to also highlight what you see on this chart, one trend that's often the case in a lot of these charts is that in the rural areas, you will see usually a slightly lower overall level of participation. And because Las Vegas has had over the past several years higher unemployment than the state as a whole, you will tend to see that South urban group with a slightly higher unemployment rate. And these trends are sort of population-wide. They aren't necessarily specific or caused by any one individual demographic, but you will see it pop up over and over. And so the overall trends that you will see, I just wanted to highlight, they are reflected in this chart as well. So if we look at the breakouts, and basically from here on out, there's going to be a table, and then the chart will be paired up. And so If I go quickly through one or the other, I'll probably talk more about the table just because I can then read the numbers and sort of point out how if you can see any clusterings within the charts, but definitely encourage you to flip through it and compare the two if you have it available on the side as well. So looking at race in the north urban and rural areas, we don't have enough data with the 1 year summary for males to do a separate breakout. And so by even just with the 3 geographic groups that we have, the standard error is too high. The South is significantly more diverse, and so we have, and it has a much larger population. And so we will generally also have a lot more data available in the South than we do in either of the other 2 areas in the state. Looking at the white alone group, which we do have in all 3 areas, you can see the same overall sort of trend. The rural unemployment rate is the lowest, but so is the participation rate. In the north urban, it's more in the middle, 3.6 and 84%. And in the South, you have similar participation to the North, but a higher unemployment rate, reflecting the higher unemployment that we have in that area as a whole. You can see as of 2022, the trend that was noted earlier that Black or African-American men do have a higher unemployment rate. Here it's roughly double some of the rates that you see for these other groups at 8.2%, and also a lower participation rate of 76%, which is a bit below the rate that you see for individuals who are white in the rural Nevada area, 77.5%. Looking at that graphically, you can see how it's sort of represented with the higher unemployment, lower participation for Black males in the bottom right area of the chart. You can see the 3 different data points for the white alone group on sort of the left center side of the chart, and then the higher rates of participation and lower rates of unemployment for the other demographic groups in Southern Nevada up near the top. And here we see the group that's Asian, some other race alone, or 2 or more races, as reported to the Census Bureau, with higher rates of participation and similar rates of unemployment. I would also say, if numbers are close together, remember that there is still a lot of margin of error in this, and so slight differences I wouldn't worry about as much as the general groupings and clusterings, and where there's a more significant difference or a more sizable difference. Those are probably the data points worth focusing on. Because data is kept separately for race and ethnicity at the Census Bureau, breaking out information by individuals who are Hispanic or Latino. Again, for men, we don't have the granular detail in the smaller areas of the North, but you can see in the South that the group, Hispanic or Latino group, does have higher participation and lower unemployment than the rest of the population as a whole. And you can also see the rough population sizes here, that it's about half the size of the non-Hispanic or Latino group in the South. When we get to the 5-year data, I'm going to go through all of the 1-year data and then show some data for 5 years. You'll see that we do have a bit more information available there. And here's how this is broken out. Overall, not an awful lot of breakouts in this group within the 1-year data. One of the other interesting things in the American Community Survey is there's a lot more household data than we get in our current population statistics. And I think that that's kind of helpful. And so here I was looking at something that looks at, does someone live in the same house that they did a year ago, or have they moved in the past year? And I know it says different house in US or Puerto Rico. So that makes it sound like it's necessarily migration between states, but really this is any other house but in the US or its territories, basically. And I thought this was interesting to see, like, how might economic circumstances be potentially affecting unemployment? If someone had to move to look for work, or moved and then is looking for work, like, might we see some differences there? Overall, you do see a little bit higher unemployment rate for people who had moved in the past year in the North and South, where we have that data. Not necessarily huge differences, but a lot of this is kind of exploratory and sharing with you, like, what are some different ways we can try to look at the data to provide you information about things that might be affecting employment and unemployment. And if you look at the chart, you'll see the same kind of trend where there is both higher participation within a fairly narrow band, as well as higher unemployment from people who have moved recently. And so this could very much be reflecting people who are moving for economic opportunity reasons. We're moving to where we expect to find a job and then looking for work once we get there. Not necessarily always the case, but especially in the north and to a more limited extent in the south, that you see both higher participation and higher unemployment, to me suggests people who are engaged and looking in some way in this breakout. Looking at an individual's level of education, oftentimes this gets rolled up into pretty broad categories. Did not finish high school degree or equivalent, some college or associate's degree, bachelor's or more. But the American Community Survey actually breaks things out by grade level completed. The downside is smaller groups means more things get omitted due to the standard error, but there are some interesting trends here. And the only area that was large enough to have this broken out in the one-year data is the southern area. But it was really interesting to me to see the difference between people who have a GED or alternative credential versus people who have a high school diploma, and even compared to people who attended 12th grade but did not receive a diploma, or had some college but less than a year. To see that 13% unemployment rate for people with a GED was really interesting to me, and I think that could be worth looking into more to see what are the potential differences in experiences and outcomes for people who, it might be that, that 13% is better than, it's still a step, but it also suggests, not completing your high school degree on the normal schedule still continues to have some labor market impacts for people. Otherwise, things are as you would typically expect. Generally, people who have a higher level of educational completion do tend to have pretty high rates of labor force participation as well as low rates of unemployment. But that GED group was one that stood out to me in a way that other breakouts that I've seen didn't necessarily highlight. And again, here in the graphical form, you can see the high participation, low unemployment with a bachelor's degree, much higher unemployment for people with a GED, and much lower participation for people who don't complete high school at all or complete a GED. So it could be that this is a group that might have higher unemployment if they were looking, but to a larger extent, they're neither working nor looking for work. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't change the header on these slides, but this should be individuals with a disability, because that's another group that we've looked at, again, among men. It's not much of a surprise, and it reinforces what we've seen before, that individuals with a disability, where we have the data to support it, have significantly lower rates of labor force participation and significantly higher rates of unemployment. And you can see that graphically represented here, even though the southern urban area is the only one at the one-year level that has this. It is a very significant impact for this particular group, which is true for men as well as women. That's all of the data that I had for the one-year ACS. And so I wanted to shift into the richer data that's available within the 5-year ACS. I'll give you a moment to give me the hook if I've been talking too long. Otherwise, I'll make my way through the rest of the presentation here. Overall, the unemployment rates that you see in the 5-year data compared to the 1-year data are often pretty similar. And I think this is because while it includes the pandemic, most of the years, especially 2017, 18, and 19, were pre-pandemic years with pretty low rates of unemployment. And so even averaging in 2020, which was incredibly high, in 2021, which was high but had fallen a lot, keeps things kind of similar to the rates that we see today. Though there are a couple of spots where I think that's not necessarily as true, and I'll point them out to you when you get them. Same overall format that we've been looking at before, same groups, just using 5-year data ending in 2021 instead of 1-year data for 2022. So when we look at race, obviously you can see we have a lot more data available, and I hope these charts are readable for you. I tried to keep them a little bit larger. If you need the data in another format, I can definitely pull that out for you. One of the things that stands out here is the impact of the American Indian population in rural Nevada having a much higher unemployment rate. This is generally true in most counties where there's data available. American Indian population has significantly higher unemployment and low levels of labor force participation. And this is a common trend across time, but you can really see it highlighted here for rural Nevada. Looking at the northern urban area, we had 2 or more races, which had the highest overall level of unemployment. We could dive into that a little bit more and try to cross-tab it and see, is this 2 or more races and reporting Hispanic or Latino? In this case, I didn't want to add too many variables to make sure that I had enough data to be able to present here today. As we look at the last 5 years in Southern Nevada, you can see the overall higher level of unemployment experienced by the Black or African American population. And so at 8% today compared to 12% on average over the last 5-year period is definitely an improvement from what we had been seeing. How much of that is because of very high rates during the pandemic versus an overall improvement from that 2017 to 21 period compared to today is a little bit harder to tease out. I do hope that the Census Bureau will soon be publishing the 5-year average through 2022, so we can separate that timing factor a little bit more. Also, high unemployment for the 2 or more races group, as we saw in Northern Nevada, as well as the Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander group in the state, and in part because of, I think, of the impact for that group in particular in casinos during COVID. And so I think that's probably a bit of a disproportionate impact within the 5-year data that we're seeing here. And in the graphical form, you can see for rural Nevada, how far apart that American Indian observation is compared to the others. Here you have Black or African Americans in the southern area, and then the more general cluster that we see among the other combinations of racial groups in the different geographies in the state. But it would be the American Indian population in rural Nevada, and again, the Black male population in Southern Nevada that are kind of highlighted and stand out in this particular breakout. We also now have, with 5-year data, both Hispanic or Latino and not Hispanic or Latino breakouts for all 3 geographic areas. And what we tend to see in a lot of these is that there's slightly or higher rates of labor force participation pretty consistently for the Hispanic or Latino group. In rural Nevada, the unemployment rate is lower. In Southern Nevada, the unemployment rate is a little bit lower. In Northern Nevada, that rate is a little bit higher. They are generally pretty close, and so this might be within the margin of error there. But we do have that consistently higher level of labor force participation. You can kind of see that if you look between the similar shapes, which are the geographic breakouts. You can see the difference between the non-Hispanic observation and the Hispanic or Latino observation for Northern Nevada here, for rural Nevada here, and for Southern Nevada here. If we look at the information on mobility that we presented earlier, the impact for people who move in rural Nevada, which was not available in the 1-year data, that there's a significantly higher level of unemployment as well as a slightly lesser level of participation. So there might be something a little bit different there. I had said with the 1-year data, we might be seeing people moving for economic opportunity because they have that higher level of labor force participation, as well as higher levels of unemployment. But it's interesting that in rural Nevada, you do see this drop in participation. That could also indicate that some people move to rural Nevada to get out of the labor force. Maybe they are moving into something more agricultural or looking for a homestead type opportunity or something a little bit different than what we see within the urban areas of the state. Because there is that more significant drop in participation. For Southern Nevada, the rates are high and pretty close, and that's true for Northern Nevada as well. For education, we get a lot more information with the 5-year breakout in all the different areas of the state. We do have that higher unemployment rate for people with the GED in Northern Nevada. here at 8.5% compared to 6% or less for other educational groups. You can see that 12.6% in Southern Nevada, which is similar to what we saw in the one-year data. And so this is replicated not just in 1 year, but it is a more of a trend over time. There's also a little bit more information about people who don't complete high school. If you're looking at rural Nevada, that 12th grade no diploma definitely stands out in rural Nevada, as well as people who only complete 11th grade, having significantly higher rates of unemployment. The GED, there wasn't enough data to populate for rural Nevada, and so the closest that we get to not completing high school is those two observations. For those who complete high school or go on to college, very different experiences in the rural areas. And I won't read through it all because there's a lot of observations here. I will highlight some of these groups, like no schooling completed in Southern Nevada. You're looking at a total population of about 10,000, unemployment of about 700. So some of these groups are larger or smaller because a lot of people tend to hit a particular milestone. And so the data is not smooth, it's very spiky. And so that's why it tends to get lumped in together. If you're looking at things like did not complete high school would be grade 9, grade 10, 12th grade no diploma, grade 11. So there's about 4 or 5 categories that all get merged into didn't complete high school. But someone who, like, there's some other possible explanations behind that data. I don't want to speculate too much without digging into it a little bit further. But you can see for rural Nevada, that has the biggest changes in experience for people who don't complete high school. And then you can also see for Southern Nevada, the GED grade 10, grade 11 group kind of broken out a little bit farther from the cluster of other experiences that we see in the top left area of this chart. I didn't include this one in the one-year data because all we got was 1 row of observation, but I thought it'd be interesting to look at what the experience was of people who have been in the military or not. For Northern and rural Nevada, we have 2 groups: never served in military and was on active duty in the past, but not now. So this corresponds pretty close to veterans and non-veterans. The trend that we see across geographic regions is that people who have served in the military tend to have both lower rates of unemployment, but also lower rates of labor force participation. This could get into things like service-connected disabilities. So someone who has a service-connected disability would show up as someone who has a disability if you look at it from that perspective and might be having lower rates of unemployment attachment as a result. That's not included in this here, but it does show up in some other potential data. But overall, there is that significantly lower rate of unemployment for people who have served on active duty in the past across our geographic areas. Another way that we can break out this data, and it's mostly available for Southern Nevada, even with the 5-year data, is looking at people who have immigrated to the United States. And so this data breaks out people by their decade of entry to the United States, where you see that not applicable, that is people who were born in the United States. It's just the way that this data is coded in the Census Bureau. And so you can see, especially in Southern Nevada, for those people who have immigrated to the United States over the last several decades, that they do tend to have lower rates of unemployment overall, as well as higher rates of labor force participation than those in Southern Nevada who were born here in the United States. And the last slide that I have looks a little bit different because I had to squeeze it differently to fit it onto the chart. But this looks at unemployment by the occupation that someone was coded to in the American Community Survey. Not necessarily the occupation that they had last when they were separated, but it's the what is it that you normally do is I think the way the question is. And so I still think it's helpful to see, and this is another area where I think the impact of the pandemic really shows up in particular occupations like chefs and head cooks, or waiters and waitresses, or dining room and cafeteria attendants, all of whom would be in that food service industry that was hit very hard by the pandemic. Also, taxi drivers continue to have higher rates of unemployment, in part because of the introduction of transportation network companies a little under 10 years ago. Freight movers and people, generalized warehouse workers tend to have some higher rates of unemployment. Stalkers and order filers, retail salespersons, security guards and gaming surveillance, janitors and building cleaners. A lot of occupations that you would tend to associate with the hotel casino industry show up, I think, in part here because of the impact of the pandemic on that industry in particular. Participation rates all generally tend to be pretty high. These are all people who are coding in occupations. You're not likely to pick up someone who's not worked, never worked, doesn't work often enough to be able to say, here's what I normally do. So there might be some bias downward in the unemployment rate and upward in the participation rate as a result. But often this is a question that we will get, like, what sorts of jobs have higher or lower unemployment? And this is the data that we can get here. This is a 5-year average, so it's not who's unemployed right now, but it is a way that we have to try to address that question. So that's all of the slides that I have. I tried to highlight as we went through some of the groups that had the biggest breakouts, but I would say the American Indian population, high school degree or less, and also people who have a GED might, even though they would be high school or equivalent in the normal breakouts, might be worth considering as a higher priority group in terms of level education as it affects people's rate of unemployment, as well as those groups that we've discussed in the past. And with that, if there's other questions, I see Ms. Thompson-Hilbert has her hand up. I'd be happy to try to answer them.
This will be brief. I know we have to move on, but is there any way to, and I don't know if this is an Empower question, is there any way to do the reverse? And that is to see of those that are that you're reporting and what sectors that they are in?
David Schmidt for the record. To some extent, one of the things that we can do with Empower is we can look at, say, people who have received a particular degree in a Nevada school that we have data for. That's a pretty big caveat in a state with as much population growth as we have here. But for someone who completes that degree, if we have the necessary data to match them between Nevada Department of Education records and Dieter's wage information, in part because and this is a bit in the weeds with Empower, NDE does not track or collect social security numbers, but for Dieter, that is the key that we have for people's wage data. And so you need other data elements involved to help bridge that gap. That is something that's being worked on the Empower side, bringing in other sources of data to help make that match. But we could look at what industries people work in. Currently, we do not collect information about the occupation that people work at for an employer. We know about the employer's industry because we assign that to the employer, but we don't know from the wage records that employers submit what jobs it is that people's doing. So we could say you work at MGM, but we couldn't say that you're a slot attendant or an accountant or a CEO. We just know for whom you work, not what work you do. To get occupational data would be a big benefit for the workforce system, but would also impose more requirements on employers to report that information because they would have it, not us. And so that's not something we currently have. Some states do it, we do not.
Thank you. Evelyn Thompson-Hilbert for the record.
Yep. Ken Evans for the record. Yeah, I definitely made some observations. I think others did too. And what I sense is that we're going to be in the subgroups we're looking at. I think you've identified some additional factors within those subgroups that we need to pay attention to in terms of education, mobility even, but definitely education. I think it's going to be a factor. And again, just to remind the group, what we're looking at with this subcommittee is on the front end, access and awareness, meaning are they aware of the system? And then number two, do they access it, or are there barriers to potentially access the workforce development system? And then on the back end, what we're concerned about is in terms of impact, do we get them employed, but not just employed 6 months to 18 months later, but are they employed? And I think I saw the term family wage employment. So some excellent data. What I'll suggest is Vice Chair Tyler Garner and I, along with Ms. Gilbertson, and there may be others that may want to contribute to it. I think what we'll do is we'll try to come up with some summary. Basically, we'll try to overlay the factors that Mr. Smith pointed out today to those subgroup populations. We're not excluding anyone, but if we're going to focus, I think it was screamingly obvious, for example, a Black male that is either a high school dropout or maybe got a GED after dropping out or some other circumstances. That's an example of the focus that we'll have moving forward. As that's an example, not exclusive, but that's an example of how to use the data that was presented today. And I see Mr. Smith nodding his head in the affirmative. The other thing I want to say very quickly, there's a state plan initiative and a strategic planning initiative underway right now. And there is an overlay because I'll talk very quickly about the issue of equity. When we were having our strategic planning subcommittee discussion, one of the things we talked about is that some of these populations, we may already be addressing them through our workforce development system, but we may need to apply even more resources, especially where there's challenges like the ones that we identified today with these factors. And I see Mr. Miller nodding in the affirmative. So that was a real good dialogue we had there in the subcommittee. Okay, I want to be respectful of time. Again, if you have comments, questions, or suggestions, I want to thank the subcommittee because I saw everyone following along, and now we're to the point where we want to figure out some things we can impact and improve these statistics when we come back a year from now. So thank you again, Mr. Smith. Okay, moving on to agenda item number 8 for discussion and information only. I would like to recognize Executive Director Jaime Cruz and Strategic Analysis Manager Brett Miller with Workforce Connections to present the Community Investment Impact Dashboard. And I got a precursor of this. The real good thing about this tool is it's a way to monitor some of these subgroups and some of the factors on an ongoing basis. Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate the opportunity to show off some of the work we're doing here in the South with data, because data is my personal passion. So what we've done is we've built a community investment impact dashboard. And the whole idea behind it is to try to communicate the value proposition of the work we do in a way that the majority of people can understand. We hope that it empowers stakeholders, businesses, and the community, and increases the transparency. Overall, what we've done is we've taken 4 years of financial information from our Title I providers, and we've combined that with participant records. So we have things like demographics. We know where the geocoding of where individuals live. And then we also have the outcomes associated with these programs. So when we put that all together, it allows us to calculate a simple ROI of what the result of our programs are. And can you confirm that you can see the dashboard?
Yes, we can.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So on our website, there's a link to this dashboard. It's also included in the packet. So overall, over the last 4 years, what this is telling to us is in Title I, between that and our NEG money, we invested $77.5 million back into the community in employment and training services. The character of and how that was invested, $22.5 million in training, classroom type training, on the job training, $1.2 million, another $3.8 million in support services. If you were to look at that, you'd find that it's primarily for transportation, things like gas cards and bus passes. Youth receive a significant amount of this money in the form of paid work experiences. And then, of course, you know, we're dealing with individuals that have often many barriers to employment. And so these services aren't really, they're not dispensed out of a kiosk. It takes an individual to help these people overcome these barriers, things that we take for granted. I know how to fill out a resume. If I were to lose my job, I'd probably reach out to a network of individuals and have a job, you know, soon. Many of the people we help don't have those resources, and it takes individuals to help them develop those skills. And then, of course, you know, there's operational costs, which every business has, similar to, you know, think accounting, administrative management. Moving on, so with that $77.5 million, we helped 12,820 people, and this is just in the southern area. And out of those 12,820, there's $186 million in wages annually associated with those individuals. You can see that we have employment metrics. Employed 2Q, which is 6 months out, we're looking at 58%. Employed 4Q, 46%. That's roughly a year out. A credential rate of 71% for individuals that were classroom trained, and then a simple calculation of a return on investment, where we take if we were to take the annualized wages and this 186 million and use that to pay back this investment of 77.5 million, it'd pay back in 5 months. So in terms of investment, that's it is significant in the fact that if you were to imagine how quickly your money would double in the stock market, you might be looking at 7 to 10 years as opposed to months. And then the other thing about this is this dashboard is interactive. So we can look at the most complete program year here. I'm going to grab PY22. That's the one that has the most, it's the most recent completed as far as performance goes. Everything updates, $22.7 million in investments, almost 3,300 individuals served, return on investment 3.4 months. So often a person is passionate about a particular group. Here I'm going to hit the youth. You'll see that we invested almost $5 million, 625 youth in that year, and a return on investment of about 8.5 months. We see youth with a lower return on investment typically. Oftentimes when they go into employment, it's part-time, and oftentimes it's at a lower wage rate. But you know, the programs get them started on that path of work and self-sufficiency. And then there's a lot of filters in here to look at different things. So a lot of them are geographically based. We can drill down into a county and understand what the investment looked like for Clark County. Drill down into your favorite local elected official. I'm going to pick Mr. McCurdy here because he's on our LEO's consortium, and we spent $3.84 million on his constituents, 538 completions, return 4.1 months. Likewise, we can look at individual cities that we have coded, And then the part that I know that Ken is really interested in, there's a whole host of other filters that we've built into this, and many of them are barriers and many of them are demographics. So one that we know that we've saw highlighted in the last presentation by David is African American males. And if we look at our results on that, in PY22, 4.89 million invested, 718 completions, return on investment 3.9 months, employment rates close to 70%. And
So pardon
yes,
me,
sir.
Mr. Miller, Ken Evans for the record. So for example, not that this is a statistically significant analysis on my part, but for example, the one thing I see here is if we can get them to access the system, there's a decent chance that they'll be employed anywhere from 6 months to a year afterwards, because it's about 2/3 or more in each case. In addition to that, if we can get them in the system, and that's where I go back to talking about one, awareness, and then two, access, there's a decent chance that they'll come out of it with the credential rate. And that's important too, especially if the individual either dropped out or had to go back, for example, to complete their education. You know, I'm just using that as an example of how we can potentially draw some connections and monitor some things on a macro and a micro level. Thank you, Mr. Miller.
Yes, that is absolutely correct. This covers individuals that have one way or another found their way to our system, and these are the results that have come out of it. And so there's a whole host of things we can look at here. Typically, the barriers I'm looking at here are the ones that we use for that are spelled out in the law. So some of them are predominantly youth barriers. Think homeless or foster youth. We can look at what the results are for a particular group there. I'm going to pare this back. Let's go ahead and take this back to youth. You can see that we invested almost $1 million in homeless youth or foster youth, 115 completions, annual wages of $921,000. And at this, I'll kind of stop and ask if there's anything anybody would like to see or questions about the data or how it's put together.
And this is Ken Evans here for the record. Any questions? We have time for maybe one or two questions, but what I would also encourage is by all means, consult Mr. Miller offline. And I have a question because we are a statewide board. So my understanding is you're working with the northern region as well as the northern region, and you cover part of the rural areas as well. So my question is, are you making provisions for the northern board to duplicate, if not implement, some of the things that you're doing in terms of this dashboard? Mr. Miller.
Yes, Mr. Chair, absolutely. It's been put together with 4 years worth of data, and the North is still reviewing what I've put together. And so with that, we'll cover the whole state as far as Title I goes. We'll cover anything that we've entered into employee and V for those Title I. So for example, The North has an H-1B grant. Down here, they also had NEG, so that's incorporated. So we'll be able to look at the data either rolled up as a state or as individual areas.
Okay, Mr. Landry, or subcommittee member Landry, did you have a question or a comment?
Kevin Landry, for the record, I am the board chair for Nevada Works, and Milt Stewart and I have discussed this, and we're excited about Mr. Miller's tool, and we are working to get our data input into it.
Thank you. And again, that's great news because we've said all along, Vice Chair Tyler Garner and I, along with the staff, we want to make sure that we cover all three regions of the state, north, south, and the rural region. And I think we've also picked up on a subset of the rural region, meaning the Native American or the American Indian population as we move forward. So what I want to do at this time is say thank you very much to Mr. Miller, and I want to give you some public recognition that was given at our executive board. Just so everyone is aware, Mr. Miller took the initiative, pulled this together on his own time and off time. So I definitely want to express the same appreciation that our overall full board chair, Hugh Anderson, express, and just say publicly again, thank you very much for doing this, because this is going to help move us forward in terms of improving our statewide system. The other thing I want to mention quickly as a comment is that my understanding is hopefully in some measure, form, or fashion, we'll be able to make a connection between this dashboard and the Empower system. I know there may still be some work to be done, but the reason why that's important is because if you connect the dots between the data that Mr. Smith is tracking to a dashboard like this that Mr. Miller is tracking on behalf of one of the boards and eventually hopefully both boards, and then beyond that connected to the Empower system, which is designed to track personnel in Nevada in a longitudinal manner, but at the same time protect their private information. This will give us a real good idea of how we're doing with our system for people that access it and get through it and hopefully stay employed on the back end. So thanks again, Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, with that, we'll close out this agenda item. And what we'll do is move on to agenda item number 9 for discussion and information only. I'd like to recognize Vice Chair Tyler Garner and myself to discuss items for the next agenda, next steps, and concluding remarks. And I think primarily what I want to do at this time right now is if initially subcommittee members have some ideas and thoughts about next steps, or based on what you saw here today, things kind of tied together. I just want to open it up to your thoughts at this particular point in time. And don't be bad. Oh, go ahead, Ms. Thompson Hilbert.
Of course I have thoughts. Evelyn Thompson Hilbert for the record. As usual, I just want to throw into the pot, and we can again talk about this more offline. How to communicate directly with the target population that we're speaking about. And so I'm just going to say that for now, because I too love data, and I love the presentations. Brett, that was an outstanding job, and thank you for all that hard work. And one of the things I think is imperative that we do, as evidenced by the Mesquite meeting, right? We have all this great information, and it's the same story kind of over and over. We have all this information. There are all these resources, but to me, without the voice of the people that we are serving, and I'm not suggesting that I have the solution either, but it may be bringing in some of the participants from the program, like, I'm going to say it wrong, Sean, don't shoot me. King of Jewels. I had a king and a jewel, and I had the order messed up. groups like that. So I would like to throw in the pot that somewhere in here we meet with the demographic in the South, young African American males, and obviously Latino and Native Americans to the north. And I would love to continue with somehow how to do that. And I know Derek, Jeffy, and I have talked a lot offline about that. Just want to throw that in. Evelyn Thompson Hilbert for the record, because I keep.
Yep. And Ken Evans, for the record, here's what I want to suggest, because I don't want us to wait until the next meeting that we have. What I would like us to do, and this is in keeping with open meeting law, is let's work and identify, we call them subcommittee working groups. So let's identify a working group that can identify, I'll toss the idea out there, 2 or 3 groups per region that are dealing with our target populations. And if we get more, that's fine, but let's identify 2 or 3 groups per region, per targeted population, for us to have those frontline conversations with. And I'll throw the gauntlet down further. Let's see if we can get this done, even if we have to do it virtually, before the end of February. Because that puts us in a position to, while we're doing it, and definitely by the time we're done with it, to hopefully answer some questions about recommendations and/or groups that may have demonstration projects that we need to latch on to or develop in this state.
And Evelyn Thompson Hilbert for the record. In keeping with that, I'd be willing to volunteer to, maybe we need something so that we can make sure we're having the same points addressed in each group. I don't know if that's a set of talking points, something for some level of continuity, so that we don't have the North saying this and the South saying that, and then we still have to have more conversations to get clarity. So if we could somehow I don't know if we need to have a document set up, somehow we can have everybody on the same page, and then how we want to approach that with the entire state. Evelyn Thompson Hilbert for the record.
Yeah, and Ken Evans for the record. Ms. Thompson Hilbert, we welcome your participation on the working group to help us address that concern. And let me see, and I'm going to try to, we are going to do public comment, but I think this is important. Vice Chair Tyler Garner, any comments, questions at this point? And I'm going to come to some of you others as well, so be composing your thoughts.
That's Tyler Garner for the record. I just want to echo your sentiments, and in keeping with the agenda item, in terms of next steps, the agenda, so affirm like getting youth or population voice in there. 2, I want to underscore what you said earlier about there's some key areas that it seems like there's an opportunity to do a deeper dive in, come up with some strategies, or look at what resources are available. And some of those included the piece around particularly the educational attainment and credentialing, that GED piece, looking at what stackable credentialing or other efforts are underway specifically to make sure that there's linkages there. And then also the piece around the occupation data that was provided, like where are the areas that they have worked previously, for me triggered a conversation around, so is anyone working to identify their transferable skills to get them into other jobs? Also, what are the career lattices or opportunities to advance in the areas that they've already been working as a part of that discussion? Also, a deeper dive for me included, so we know who's not working or working, but do we know anything about the job quality or wages? And I think you mentioned something about family wage coming up in the data. That how do we leverage this information to really move the needle around unemployment for the impacted populations? And then as it related to the dashboard, which I thought was incredibly helpful, I had off to Brett for taking initiative to make that happen, even looking at where we are making our investments. So when you looked at the classroom training versus on-the-job training, and on-the-job training being where they're literally with an employer being trained in an area that an employer will pay for, there was maybe a 10th of the classroom training investment when you compared on the job training there. And so are there opportunities to leverage the way that we're going about the training or credentialing to get more unemployed individuals in the work while helping some others that may be, I don't know, marginally connected, advancing in it. And then in particular, leveraging the dashboard to look at that Q2 and Q4 data. Because in some cases, the drop off was like 30% in terms of the folks not having work after they had gotten resources through the system to secure it, right? And so are they ending up in our unemployment numbers, not because they haven't connected to the system or haven't gotten some foundation, but maybe there's some additional refinement needed to get them maintaining employment for longer periods, if that makes sense. And just want to highlight that we may need to look at in terms of and I think the survey defined it as American Indian. I don't typically use that term for our indigenous communities, but do we have any connections with those communities in each area that we're looking at? So like, has anyone contacted or do we have the Paiute community at the table here? And is there something that they may share with us about the context of employment in their community that may be consistent or not consistent with what we're seeing in a larger sampling? And so if we're going to agendize something, are there a couple of items that we can commit to looking at our next meeting beyond the youth voice?
Yeah, absolutely. The only thing I'll add to what Vice Chair mentioned is that one of the things that I think we need to do is to make sure that we figure out ways to overlay the direction the overall Nevada economy is moving in. And what I mean by that is we're already well underway to diversifying our economy in terms of renewable energy, advanced manufacturing, logistics, healthcare, and information technology. But are we connecting the individuals that are in our system into those areas? You know, I've said it at the risk of repeating myself and being a broken record. It will be very displeasing to me and others if we diversify the economy, but 2, 3, 5 years from now or more, some of these same individuals that are disproportionately unemployed are still disproportionately unemployed. So I want to make sure we're making that connection or overlay as well. And that kind of ties back to the conversation, Mr. Smith, that we had about the occupational data and figuring out ways to connect to that. Let me go to Committee Member Landry. Any comments or at this point?
No, I'm glad to see the numbers coming together. I think that being able to get the entire state represented will be great for us. We have the Good Jobs Challenge grant up north. We have a tribal navigator as part of that, so we might be able to pull some data from that relationship as well into this.
Thank you very much, sir. Committee Member Dreibelbis. Any comments? And
yes, I'm here, Ken.
Yes, any comments at this point?
None for me, thank you.
Okay, and forgive me for putting everyone on the spot, but I'm just trying to make sure that we get input from our subcommittee members. And let's see, Christine Nelson.
Oh, Chair, she's not on the subcommittee.
Okay, all right. I know Ms. Merritt.
Yes, Ken, I don't have any comments, but I would like to say to the group that is going to form the subcommittee, please reach out to me because I do have some suggestion on some groups that we can get some data from as far as the group that we're going to be looking at.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Ms. Merritt. And then I think Mike Yoder.
I just want to say that David always brings us some really good, thorough data that we can take back to our team and digest and share and try to help formulate our strategies going forward. DWSS is constantly working in this area with the disconnected youth, Project 354. This is a great overlap for us. And we're always trying to figure out how do we reach the population that we're talking about, the underserved, hard to reach. Why do people not participate? the resources are rich in Southern Nevada. And so that's always a burning question. And I think it comes down to meeting people where they are and coming up with, I think, being able to sell a solid product. That's the thing there. Are we marketing the services as a solid end game for the person that we engage? You get sometimes 30 seconds to sell to somebody what you can do for them. And so we're always trying to frame it like that and take a look at what we're offering folks and try to show them the most, the best end game for that person, and how that meets what their goals might be, and try to figure out ways to inspire them toward goals too. So some folks don't realize that they have these opportunities, and trying to market it in the most inspiring light that we can, and using strategies of outreach in the community and with individuals that we have in our agency that can best sometimes identify with the folks that we're trying to reach. We're recruiting young workers within the state here, rather than having my old gray hair going out to speak to disconnected youth. We're reaching out to 18 to 21-year-old workers here at the state who were in their same shoes a couple years ago, to say, hey, look at what I did. I came in as a clerk. I know it's not much money starting out at $15 an hour, but now I'm at $23 an hour. I quickly promoted within the state. I've got a great career ahead of me, and a benefits package, and we're trying to form partnerships with employers. And I think a really crucial part of all this is partnerships between system partners, and having, we specialize in non-degree credentialing programs to get folks a living wage. We really want to see our clients get jobs at a living wage. The inflation is just killing everybody. The average wage, we've trained people in HVAC and software developing, and these employers are offering $18, sometimes $16 an hour coming out when they can go work for Target for $20. So we're trying real hard to enhance our job placement partnerships between BWSS, DETR, LVGEA. Hopefully the chamber can come in and help us package together a really solid product to market to these folks. And then it's a matter of reaching them, finding them, and making that first 30 seconds count so they don't disappear on you. So these stats are always great to help with the strategy and structure of what we're doing. And I appreciate David, and appreciate you, Ken, and everybody at the table here who's taking a passion for this project.
Thank you very much, Mike. And I want to piggyback in a positive manner and say what you just described about hiring individuals from within neighborhoods, environments, communities, because they can be a success story, one individually, but then collectively they're in a position to make sure that we have a workforce development system that is both professionally and culturally competent. And again, the reason why that is important, and you talked about it, you may have 30 seconds in this day and age in order to make our targeted population aware of how to access our system. So kudos to what you mentioned. Ms. Gilbertson, is there anyone else I missed that's on the subcommittee? I think I covered everyone. But again, I wanted to make sure that I got the comments that I did. Ms. Merritt, we definitely, with our working group within the next 30+ days, will reach out to you to get the ideas of the organizations you want us to follow up with. So thank you for that. Mr. Yoder, it sounds like you have some ideas as well for things for us to keep in mind as well. As far as the subgroup, and I think I'll be okay with this, is I think if we have myself, Vice Chair Tyler Garner, Ms. Thompson Hilbert, I think if we keep that as the work group, and here's what I'll say, Ms. Gilbertson, maybe reach out to some of the other subcommittee members in an ad hoc basis to kind of get some information from you, but I think we'll be okay and we won't violate anything. The other individual, and I've made a by name request for you a couple of times now, but Mr. Miller, we'll probably reach out to you a little bit as well from time to time, and obviously Mr. Yoder. And that's not to exclude anyone, but again, our goal is to focus on the frontline interaction, and I'm going to lead into public comments in an appropriate manner here, but where we are now is let's talk to our targeted population, with the sample size from each, again, in all three regions. And let's figure out some concrete pathways forward so we can hopefully a year from now be in a position to say we moved the statistics initially, but beyond that, we're doing some things systemically to make the system work better for the targeted populations. And I hope everybody realizes we're talking about not only the individuals that are somewhat aware of accessing our system, but again, we have a pretty substantial disconnected youth or young adult population that we need to consider as well. So it all ties together. With that, let me check my agenda here. Okay, before moving on, the chair kindly requests that any member of the Barriers and Underserved Populations Subcommittee who arrived late after roll call was taken to please identify themselves at this time so you are marked present. And I know we got Mr. Yoder.
Yeah, Mike Yoder for the record. I know Katie called me out, so thank you.
Perfect.
And I apologize for being late there.
No, that's fine. That's fine. You're fine. It's great to have you here, and definitely was great to get your input. Okay, with that, we'll move on to agenda item number 10. Members of the public are invited for final comments. Any public comments on the telephone? Okay, any public comments on the Zoom? And with that, Mr. Torrey?
Yes, so officially, good afternoon again, everyone. Sean Torrey for the record, Vice President of King and Jules, also Senior Management Analyst for the City of Las Vegas, just FYI for the record. If I could briefly, is it okay if I share my screen? Okay, cool.
Yes, that's fine.
Perfect. Let me go here. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. So just a reminder for everyone, King of Jewels, we are a critical mentorship program using critical mentorship of the lens of Dr. Tori Weston Cernan, which is a youth-centric approach to mentoring, which means is the youth are included in as far as what we do as a mentorship organization. So that's what KOJ Camp represents, this critical mentorship program, where it's a cohort of youth. We have 30 active Black youth involved inside of King of Jewels mentorship. That's the young kids you see down to the left. And then if you look at the upper bound mentorship program, that's the picture you see on the right. And the cool part is we actively work with these kids all year long until they graduate from high school, which is it's pretty much, and we always have re-evolving kids who come in and come out because they graduate or they come in during the year. But just to be quick, we do have the Jewels for You internship program that we did start this year. The last time we hinted at it at the last meeting, but we officially did start the Jewels for You internship program, which gives our cohort of youth the opportunity to work with us on the business side, where it's an internship. They have the opportunity to really put the fact that they worked for King of Jewels on their resume. It gives them the experience and hands-on professional development while working alongside with the executive team on business marketing, program development, and entrepreneurship and workforce executive administration skills. And so let's see. Oh, sorry. So these are the three areas that they get to be internships in. So business marketing, program development, and executive leadership team. So and those are just the subheads where they get to work on the marketing aspect. They do project management where they're out with me, meeting with different business owners or meeting with different business owners on collaborations and fundraising events. And then they get to work on the back end of what it's like to work on what it takes to have your licensures and taxes. And so we teach them all these skills. The cool part about this, they actually had to apply for this internship, and we had to give them interviews. So we're teaching them those soft skills before they even get to this point. This is something that's not just given. You have to earn, you have to apply like it's an actual job, and we put them through this process. One of the things that we push them to do is to be creative, and encourage them and then give them empowerment to create. So this is something that they actively created themselves and that we're just supporting them on. They wanted to address a social justice issue of homelessness. So they decided to create their own a coat and blanket drive that they're going to be hosting on February 10th. Yes, it's during Super Bowl weekend. I told them that they were crazy, but they were down to do it. I said, no problem. So this is actually during our leadership development workshop hours as well. So they're going to open it to the public and allow them to be in their space, to see how they're able to create and develop and see what the community thinks of their social justice issues. So that's just to give you an example of what we've been doing actively with them since we started the internship portion. That's just to give brief. We can go into further detail later, but until the next agenda item. I know I'd only had 3 minutes, so I wanted to be brief.
No, thank you very much, Mr. Torrey. And so I don't violate open meeting law or public comments. What I'll suggest is follow up with Ms. Gilbertson so that we can officially agendize it, because there are some follow-up things I want to point out about that we discussed before, as far as career path and employment, as well as ties to the workforce development system, with the thought being 70% of your cohort will either be employed or on a career path by the time we get to a year from when we first talked. Okay, with that, Mr. Goff.
Thank you, Chair Evans. My name is Alex Goff for the record. I'm a regional representative with Senator Jackie Rosen, and I manage the workforce development portfolio in Northern Nevada for the senator. I'd like to thank you all for the subcommittee's meeting today. It was very informative with a bunch of very important data that was presented between the dashboard and the data that was presented earlier. I'd like to put my email in the chat if possible, so I could be added to any distribution list so I can find out about future meetings. Thank you very much, Chair Evans.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Goff, for being here. And again, I don't want to violate any rules of the road. What I will say is that we have the ability to have non-voting members on our various subcommittees. So there may be a possible role there. I'll ask Ms. Gilbertson to follow up with you on that, given your position.
Thank you, Chair Evans.
With that, Ms. Gilbertson, anyone else on Zoom?
Seeing none.
Okay. Okay. We'll close out agenda item number 10, public comments. I want to say thank you all very, very much. We appreciated your participation in 2023. I want to thank you in advance for your participation in 2024. And again, the markers laid down, the goal, you saw the statistics today. You see the focus from a subgroup standpoint. The goal is a year from now, we improve upon the statistics, but preferably we know that the system is moving in a direction where over the course of time, we'll eliminate the disparities and hopefully put everybody in a position to be aware of the system, have access to the system on the front end, and then again on the back end, we're placing people, but most importantly, placing people in career and/or family wage opportunities, again, building on what Mr. Yoder mentioned about some of the challenges. And that may be something else we have to work on as well as, and I've been a business owner myself, as well as worked in the public and the private sector, helping people understand that there's a benefit to making sure as an employer you pay people certain wages when it's all said and done. And I know that's just, I won't go any further than that, but I just want to put that on the record real quick. Thanks again, Mr. Yoder, for expressing your concern. Okay, with that, hearing no further comments, I hereby move to adjourn this meeting. Thank you all very much.